Canadian state media are such blatant propagandists. It's a goddamn miracle that in the last federal election, the Conservatives got nearly as large a percentage of the vote share as the Liberals did. There's a poll going around stating that 50% of Canadians would be ashamed to have Pierre Poilievre as their Prime Minister. Now, CBC, CTV, all the major Canadian news outlets are leading their reports last night with this news that 50% of Canadians would be ashamed to have Poilievre as Prime Minister. This after he won his election in Crowfoot, overwhelmingly over 80% of the vote. It's pure propaganda. When you dig into how this polling was actually carried out, the lack of professionalism, the propagandistic methods that are used are truly unbelievable. Now, obviously, when you're running a poll, in order to have a meaningful poll that represents the over 41 million Canadians, you need to be polling a representative sample size from the Canadian population. Whether you're polling 5,000 people, 15,000 people, it only means something if that sample size fairly represents the 41 million people in the country. Now, you dig into this poll, which is done by Angus Reid, an absolute liberal rag that the CBC and CTV use all the time. He polled 2,200 people, which is fine. It's not a large number, but you can run a poll with 2,200 people. But you dig into the numbers. In total, from Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Alberta, three extremely conservative provinces, he polled 416 people. He polled more people from Ontario, 670, than he did from those three provinces combined. He polled another 650 people from Quebec. This is not representative. He went to liberal strongholds and he, in overwhelming numbers, polled people from those areas of the country. So when you actually dig into the way the polling was carried out, it was guaranteed to wind up with bad numbers for any conservative, regardless of what the question is, regardless of who the politician was they were asking. But does CBC or CTV make any mention of the way that Angus Reid carried out their polling? Of course not. They just lead with the headline, 50% of Canadians would be ashamed to have Pierre Poilievre as Prime Minister. If they're willing to lie and manipulate so blatantly in their polling in an attempt to sway the Canadian people, can you imagine everything else they're lying and manipulating to about? I see day after day, they're reporting from these pro-Palestinian protests that they say are friendlier on our streets. I've been at these rallies day after day. There are fake body bags, people wearing masks, yelling the most vile things you've ever heard, fake blood on their hands, threatening people, intimidating people, violent mobs. Then you flip on the CBC or CTV and it makes us look as though these are your friendly neighbors who are out on our streets. The level of propaganda in Canada, I think Stalin couldn't hold a candle to it. It's truly embarrassing. You look at what's going on in the real world, and then you turn on the CBC or go to cbc.ca at night, who, by the way, are getting $1.5 billion a year from the Canadian taxpayer. And it's so divorced from reality. It's a bunch of far left-wing wokies who are attempting to manipulate the Canadian public into believing it. Now, you look through these Angus Reid polls, they don't ask anything critical about Mark Carney. They don't ask, are you ashamed about Mark Carney? Do you have any issues with the fact that every third word out of Mark Carney's mouth is, Do you have any issue with the fact that Canada has 35% tariffs when the vast majority of the Western world has negotiated substantially lower tariffs? The question framing is another incredibly important variable when you're running these types of polls. But do they look critically? No, because CBC, CTV, Canadian media are propaganda mouthpieces for the Liberal Party of Canada. And it's no wonder that the boomers overwhelmingly voted left-wing, because this is where they're getting their news from. If you're CBC and you're receiving $1.5 billion a year from the Canadian taxpayer, what motivation do you have to give the Conservatives a fair shake? You very well know that your funding is going to be cut substantially if Pierre wins. So why the hell would you give him a fair shake? And these are far left-wingers to begin with. Travis Donraj, who just recently left the CBC, said essentially he had to go because they would not allow him to report fairly. He was one of the few guys on the CBC who would give conservatives a fair shake. And he had to leave because CBC said, no, we can't be hearing from the other side. So Canadians just need to be aware that whenever they hear polling data or they hear questions that were asked to the Canadian population and they think they're hearing the straight shooting answer to what Canadians are saying, please do some digging into the polling. Look at the breakdown of who they polled. All these Angus Reid polls are required to break down exactly who they polled. Look and see what percentage of people from each province are they asking. How are they framing the questions? If you notice with Angus Reid, they always frame the questions towards conservative in the most negative bent possible, while framing any question to a liberal in the most positive bent possible. These are not news outlets. These outfits are not giving you the straight. These outlets are not giving you straight information. They are spinning everything and they don't want you to be aware of it. It's incredibly unethical, but their funding is on the line. You think they care? They think they're on the right side of history. They think unlimited immigration to Canada is the moral thing to do. They think that they can morally preen to middle and lower class Canadians about how superior they are because in their neighborhoods, they don't see the effects of safe supply, open crack smoking on the streets like those of us that actually live in normal neighborhoods. I'm sure Mark Carney with his motorcade out of Ottawa doesn't see what the safe supply does. But those of us who live in Ottawa a couple of blocks away from Parliament see open crack smoking every day. We sure realize. So we need to be aware because these guys are the spigot is not going to close on the money coming into these corrupt media outlets anytime soon with the Liberals in power. They're going to continue to funnel them billions of dollars, just like it was announced that 73 billion Canadian taxpayer dollars have gone to immigrants in the past decade. So we have to shout from the rooftops, Canadians, these are propaganda outlets. They are not news outlets. I'm going to be hosting rallies for Canadian patriots. Take Canada Back rallies. Saturday, September 13th, Saturday, September 27th, Parliament Hill. We need to hit the streets, make our voices heard. If you're interested in details, please shoot me a message. Going to get underway at noon, Saturday, September 13th, Saturday, September 27th. I'm near 10K followers on TikTok, and Canadian politicians don't like dissidents, so please make sure you're following me on YouTube, youtube.com/@FightForCanada 2025, youtube.com/@FightForCanada 2025. You can also check out my store if you want to grab some merch, donate to support the cause. My Substack. I'm going to be promoting as much as I can throughout the next couple of weeks. We actually have to, patriotic Canadians have to physically get out there on the streets and say enough is enough. And always remember, tell everybody you know, CBC is not media, they're propaganda.